First, we have our panelist, Ian Epp. Ian was raised on a family grain farm near Blackleg, Saskatchewan, where he continues to be involved in the operation. He graduated from the University of Saskatchewan with Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, majoring in agronomy. And in the decades since he's graduated, he's been involved in the canola industry primarily as an extension specialist. In November of this year, he joined Sask Oilseeds as a grower extension agronomist. We also are being co-hosted by Marissa Robitaille. She is the technical sales agronomist for Southern Alberta. And my name is Rianne Balma. I'm the technical sales agronomist for Northern Alberta. So today we just went over introductions. Ian will start with his presentation this morning, and we will also include a discussion on our product mix census in the field, followed by a Q&A session. Next slide. And without further ado, here's Ian.
All right, we can jump to the next slide. We've had enough intro slides. I will get going. My name is Ian Epp. I farm Blaine Lake, Saskatchewan. And I've spent just over a decade doing canola extension, agronomy. I now do flax working for Sask Oilseeds, but today we're talking about canola, and that's good because I'm a little more familiar with canola. So as a farmer, as an agronomist, I'm going to try to keep really practical advice. It's really easy to be, it's the middle of winter and say, here's what you should do for Blackleg. Here is all the things you need to do. But then you go as a farmer myself, and you go in the middle of the field season, you're like, oh, this is tough. I got to add this in, or this takes more time. So we'll try to give real practical Blackleg and Verticillium information. Next slide. So Blackleg, we're all probably familiar with Blackleg. We have some nice symptoms here kind of throughout the growing season. This is a disease that's been around forever. In the 80s and 90s, it was a huge problem for canola. In the mid-90s, we had our first resistant varieties, and I wouldn't say the problem went essentially away, but we did sort of solve the problem temporarily where it was no longer a major yield robber in Western Canada. Outside of the odd breakthrough or when the stars align, this is a problem, a disease we had really good control for. And in the decades since, we've had a lot of research. I'm going to talk about a lot of tools. We have a lot of tools in Blackleg, and maybe why we need to take a really good another look at this disease. Over the last 5 years, it's been coming up, and we're going to need to maybe up our game when it comes to control. Next slide. So looking at a couple different things here, we see some stem lesions in that one picture. You're going to see the kind of the streaking, the pycnidia, those black pycnidia. This is some of the symptoms we're maybe familiar with. And then that stem cutting and some stem cankering, where in really bad situations, we're going to have large yield loss and maybe the plants just flopping over. Next slide. The biggest thing when we're cutting for Blackleg is where to do a stem cutting. So at 60% seed color change, we want to be cutting our stems. This is something easy to do as you're doing your swathing operation, if you're still swathing, or as you're doing maybe a glyphosate, pre-harvest application of glyphosate. That's a prime time to be checking for Blackleg. All of the, do you need to do something else for Blackleg? Are you losing yield to Blackleg? What is it costing you? We need to have data from in your field. So as you're doing an application or at that 60% seed color change, stop a few spots in the field, and we want to do a stem cutting. Right around where that line is on the stem, if you're unsure when you have your clippers, I would start a little bit lower. There you can see a lateral or root there. Start lower and just keep cutting a little bit. Every little bit cut up, and then once you've done a few stems, you'll figure out where that sweet spot is, where it looks like you get this nice, either hopefully it's a clean, healthy stem, or you see the Blackleg. So just start a little bit lower and just keep slowly cutting up. If you cut too high, you're going to see some green material. And once you're above the growing stem, it doesn't work so good. But that's just my easy advice, is start low and just cut every little bit until you find that right level. Next slide. This is what we're looking for. I mean, this is the right spot in the plant. Ideally, we're not going to see this Blackleg, but if we are, this is what we're looking for. So we're going to see this black pie-shaped part of the stem. Usually it's very distinct, clean, healthy portion, and then black segment. Next slide. We can also, in really bad cases, we're going to see stem cankering. A really heavily infected plant may have flopped over and dried down prior to 60% seed color change for the normal field part. If you have patches with premature ripening, there's lots of things that can cause premature ripening, but it could be Blackleg, especially now that we're a little bit more worried about verticillium, or maybe you're worried about clubroot, other diseases that can cause this. It can always be Blackleg as well in really bad situations causing this. And this, in some of these cases, this will be 100% yield loss for these individual plants. Next slide. All right, so we have a lot of tools in Blackleg. Crop rotation is the basis for all of these things. Blackleg, the residue is a residue disease. So if you let that residue break down over time, you can really reduce your blackleg risk. Now, a 4-year rotation is ideal for that. I realize that for most growers in the black soil zone, the average rotation is a 2-year rotation. In the dark browns, it's a 1 and 3, right? This is not always a practical thing for farms. But if you do have a field that's a train wreck for blackleg or something's gone completely sideways on you, you can always reset individual fields by just lengthening the rotation out. Hopefully we can keep it manageable without having to do that. But if you have a field that's just, you're unhappy with your blackleg results, crop rotation is your friend. Even going from a 2-year to a 3-year rotation can make a difference. The one I want to spend a little bit more time on, this is the big hammer. So in any good blackleg program, especially right now, you're going to have to be using multiple things. You're going to have to multiple things kind of layered in to control your blackleg. But the biggest hammer is variety selection. This should be the biggest thing we work on. And then we'll be adding in our fungicides, our seed treatment, kind of on top of that as needed. Next slide. All right, so a little bit just to the primer. I don't need to go blow by blow through the disease cycle, but infection happens really early in the season. You get those pycnidia, that's the top of your screen there. You get this critical infection window, and it's coming from old residue. So anytime, especially if you're in a 2-year rotation, you're planting your canola. If you go walk through your stubble, you're going to find stubble from 2 years ago from that previous canola. It takes a little while to break down. That's where it's coming from. So it's evenly spread throughout your field. You get that early season infection. And then that infection, especially if conditions are good, we're wet, we're humid, that infection will build throughout the early vegetative growing season. And then we'll see those cross-section stems later in the season like we already showed. And then if we had 2 years ago or whatever, the last time the canola crop, we had a lot of blackleg, that means that material is even more infected for next year. So we can kind of see this building. If we don't do anything else to change our management, we're going to see a building up of residue over years. That'll come into play a little bit later when I show you where we are with blackleg across the prairies. Next slide. All right, so blackleg across the prairie. So in the early to or the mid 90s, we had our first resistant varieties, and they were really good. And if you look, especially looking early 2000s, we had almost no blackleg. It was there, you could find a little bit, but yield loss was extremely minimal. This varieties and multiple varieties, they mostly used one gene, this RLM3 gene, and it was highly effective. It worked really, really well for us. So blackleg was kind of a non-problem. Starting in the 2010s, and we see this slow build. Now we had some really wet conditions in there, which maybe helped blackleg, but also tighter rotations and just the durability of the gene. We've been using the same gene for a while. Now companies have been adding in other genes slowly, but RLM3 was still the bread and butter of what most varieties. So it didn't matter which company. Back in the day, they probably, if they had an R-rated variety, it was probably using RLM3 as their major gene resistance. And so if you look at the last couple of years, especially 2022 to 2024, we see a further increase in blackleg resistance. And in 2024, it was the worst blackleg year we've had in Western Canada since we had resistance. So we see this building up of residue. We're getting more and more infected residue, and a bit of blackleg's okay. At the low end, you're not seeing a lot of yield loss. Your plants can kind of compensate to some degree, but with this building up of residue, and then 2024 was really wet, really cool early season, perfect infection, and we saw some massive blackleg yield loss. In 2025, I don't have that numbers on here. They came down a little bit. We were drier early season. The conditions weren't as ideal for infection, but we still see historically very high blackleg levels, especially for a year that's not super good for infection. Now, the other thing to think about as we're going into 2026, if you're on a 2-year rotation, which is really common, a lot of those fields in 2026 that are canola were canola in 2024, where we had record blackleg levels. So this is something to pay extra attention to in 2026, just because we don't know what the environment's going to be. We don't know what the conditions are going to be, if infection's going to be really good, but the residue levels should be really high, are going to be infected with blackleg. So something to pay extra attention for this spring. Next slide. The nice thing with blackleg, because we have decades of research, we have a really good rating scale where we can tell you, again, and blackleg maybe it's fairly easy with a pie shape. So you go in your field, you do your cross sections, and we can rate it from a 1 to 5. At the 0 to 1, you're going to see a little bit of blackleg. That's fine. The 1, a little bit of blackleg is okay. You're seeing basically no yield loss. Once we get up to the 2s and especially 3s and 4s, and it was really common in 2024, especially to rate a field that was averaging a 3 or between a 3 and a 4. And that's where we see significant yield loss. Next slide. Again, going to the research we have, we can then plug that in. So you've rated your scale, your field, you know what the blackleg level is, you plug it into this. Canola Council has a calculator, and you plug in your yield, you can plug in your price of canola. And this was a very common, I participated in the provincial disease survey in Saskatchewan. This was a pretty average disease score in 2024. 25 was a little bit better, but still we're seeing, I mean, if you plug in this one here, if it was 5 bushels, in 2025, maybe it was only 3 or 4 bushels, but we know what 3 or 4 bushels does to profitability. And these are solvable problems. So blackleg is sneaky. We're worried about verticillium because it's new. We've seen the train wreck Sclerotinia can have some years. But blackleg has kind of been sneaky and growing in the background. And it's a point where when you're picking varieties, this is probably one of the top things you should be thinking about when you're picking your varieties. Next slide. All right, talking about picking varieties, there's 2 types of resistance. I'm going to keep this fairly simple. There's major gene, minor gene. Sometimes they're called quantitative and qualitative. I stick with major and minor just because they're simpler words to say. They're simple to understand. Both are good. And essentially, you want both in a variety. You want an effective major gene, and you want a pile of minor genes in the background that are going to help you out, especially if your major gene isn't that effective. Next slide. Okay, so why this matters. The major genes, I mentioned in 96, we started with RLM3. And RLM3, so there's all sorts of races of blackleg in your field. So this is the early 2000s. You see a nice distribution of them. And all your blackleg has to do is be effective to 1. So if you have RLM3, that gene was working, it took care of all of these races of blackleg. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a bit of an update here. RLM3, that LM3, that line that almost disappeared. So the gene is reacting to that disease or to that race of blackleg, except we were so good, we almost have completely eradicated that race. That means it doesn't recognize the other blackleg. You don't get the response. And so something that the bag says resistant, it's an R-rated variety. It is an R-rated variety in some conditions, but in a lot of field conditions, that variety may not work as an R-rated variety. It may just be essentially a susceptible variety. You might have some minor genes depending on the variety, and that'll help you. But if your major gene is not effective, in some cases, it's going to work just as poorly as a West Star completely susceptible variety. Next slide. This is my attempt to kind of understand how this is. All of these words are actually the same word, just in different languages. So if you're a canola plant, this is your job. You got to stream through this and you got to figure out what the heck this is. And at this point, we have no idea. And if we go to the next slide, this would be like if we have effective major gene. In there, maybe this works better in the in-person one. At the top, you see the word blackleg. These are all blackleg in different languages. All you have to do is understand the English one, and suddenly it all makes sense. They're all blackleg. We can understand that. That's what a plant's going through when it's trying to understand blackleg. So if we have an effective major gene, it says that, oh, we got blackleg. You get a hypersensitive response from the plant, and suddenly it's resistant. You get resistance to all the races in your field. So that's why we're trying to match up what's in the field with what your plant can recognize. Next slide. Again, so major gene resistance is fairly straightforward. It's that lock-in key. If you can recognize it, you get resistance to all the varieties. It can work really, really well. If you don't, it's a complete miss, and it may work as a susceptible. Next slide. There's a little bit more going on. It's a bit more complicated, but at the end of the day, we'll go to the next slide. I just want you to know that this is a bit more complicated. There's some masking. There's a few other things. If we click forward to this one, all we want to know is we want to avoid this, right? We want to avoid the 5-7 bushel yield loss. As a grower, as an agronomist, you want to know what variety should I be growing next? How do I not have this happen to me next time I'm growing canola in this field? So one of the ways of doing that is you can take samples. You take your stem samples in. In Saskatchewan, you bring it to Discovery Seed Labs. They're going to run a test. They can tell you, at the same time, they're going to tell you if you have verticillium in your field, which is kind of nice. But they're going to also tell you blackleg. And they're going to tell you what kind of blackleg, what race of blackleg you have, or what race is. Likely you're going to have multiple of them. And so from this race test, we can then match it up with a labeled variety that's has an effective major gene. Next slide. All right, so what we're looking about here is the phenotype. And so you see this long list of letters. The phenotype, that's what you're going to get. Some tests will show you different races, but it'll tell you, A, if you have the V, if you look down at the comment section there, it'll tell you longosporum. So there was verticillium detected, and it'll tell you the number of isolates with different genes. You can kind of get a sense of how many of the races, if they're a dominant race, and what's going on in your fields. Next slide. All right. Sometimes they'll give you a bit of a breakdown of 50% of it. Maybe you'll have one race that's really common, some that are minor. And so the goal is to take one that's really common, or if you have one number that's common throughout all the races, that's the kind of R gene we're going to be looking for in a canola variety. Next slide. So we're looking here at our races. We have, maybe we had a lot of 2 or 4 or 7. We can match that up with a resistance group, and a number of companies label their canola varieties. So maybe you're looking for a B or an E or 1. You go to that, and then from there you can pick a canola variety that will be effective. It's not exactly a silver bullet because, again, there are multiple races in your field, but this is giving you the best indication that a R-rated canola variety will be an R-rated canola variety in your specific field versus just, all the canola varieties are rated R. But depending on what you've grown in the past, what blackleg races in your field, some of those R-rated varieties are going to work as a susceptible in your field, or could. Next slide. All right, so just to I went through a lot of information on the blackleg race test, but the simple thing is you want to identify what's going on in your field. Take a sample, send it to Discovery Seed Labs, or each province has their own seed lab. You can identify the major genes. They'll do that work for you. And then you get a report from them. You match that up with the resistance group, and you can choose an effective cultivar. This should give you a pretty good sense of what's going on in your field and should give you pretty good blackleg control. Under high-risk conditions, there's a few other things. I mentioned we're going to talk about some of the other blackleg management, but this should be the backbone of our blackleg management plan. Next slide. All right, so again, crop rotation, highly effective. Sometimes a bit of a challenge for growers to incorporate more crops or manage that, but crop rotation is always a good one. Variety selection, that's the backbone of our blackleg tool. That should be doing the heavy lifting, is matching up that variety. Genetic resistance it can work really well. And then I'll talk just briefly about the 2 other options here. And these are good ones to layer in, especially if you're unhappy with your blackleg control, you're seeding into really high risk conditions. These are the kind of things that you can make the call. The variety selection, you probably bought your canola seed last year, right? October, November, that's prime canola buying season. And sometimes we haven't always got our blackleg race tests back yet. We're not sure exactly what's happening. And we don't know what the weather's going to be, what the infection is. So these last 2 are ones that are a little bit easier to layer in as we get closer to spring. Next slide. So seed treatment. Blackleg infection happens really early. Seed treatments can be an effective way to mitigate some of that, especially in high-risk situations. Or if you're not sure, maybe you're not sure if your variety is going to be an R-rated variety, a seed treatment can be a good tool to add in. Next slide. And the other one is fungicide. So fungicide, this is your last chance to do blackleg control. Your variety, you probably picked your canola varieties up in October of last year. Your seed treatments need a little bit of lead time to plan the seed testing. So if you've gone through the steps and you've done some of those things, or maybe you realized, oh, I should have picked a different variety, or I'm not sure, my canola variety is not labeled. You get into the season and suddenly you think you're in a high risk situation. We've had lots of moisture early season. It's wet, it's humid, the canola is kind of sitting there. That's where a fungicide would be effective, especially one that's not an MR. But again, all the R cultivars, even though the bag says R, it may not be acting as an R in your field. So that might be the point where a fungicide would be useful. If you're going to apply a fungicide, all of the data from Ag Canada suggests early. Early is better. I would rather you spraying really small 2-leaf canola and more dirt than spraying a large 6-leaf canola. Just because early season, that's where we get this, that's when the infection's happening. That's when the critical infection's happening. And we want to stop that as early as possible. So that 2 to 4 leaf, that's when I'd be looking at a fungicide application if you're going down that road. Next slide. Now, the other reason why blackleg is maybe more important these days is because of verticillium. Verticillium is a fairly new disease. Manitoba's had it bad for a couple of years. We see it creeping into Saskatchewan. Alberta has some. And there is an interaction between blackleg and verticillium where 1 + 1 equals more than 2. If we have both in the field, and often we do in the really bad verticillium fields, the really bad blackleg fields, usually we have both. These nice pictures are really good for IDing because you have verticillium standing alone. That's what the stem cutting is going to look like. Blackleg, that pie shape, really dark. but often in the field, we're seeing them combined. Next slide. So we're going to see stem infections where you see both of them in that B and C, especially that C. You see that it's just really dark black, and the plant has some ability to compensate for some of these diseases, but that ability is really limited when we have both infections happening at the same time. Next slide. You can tell them apart. So you have pycnidia, these oozy kind of top spores on the blackleg. We talked about the stem cankering. Verticillium, we're going to be more shredding. It's going to be dry little black microsclerotia, so that really tiny, tiny black specks. And if you're looking a little bit early at that 60% seed color change, they might still be underneath the skin of the plant, the epidermis a little bit. So take your fingernail or a knife and just scrape them back, and you'll see this little like salt and pepper. Like a salt and pepper, the pepper, that's what the microsclerotia, the size, the shape, the color, that's what it's looking like. And you'll see some shredding later season, especially if you come back post-harvest. A lot of those stems will be shredding. So we can tell them apart, but often you're going to see it's going to be a bit of a dog's breakfast with blackleg and verticillium in the same stems. Next slide. You also see earlier season some of this half senescing with verticillium. That can be a good thing to identify it early. At this point, we're just identifying it so we can realize it's there for next year. There's nothing we can do at this point, but identifying that we have this problem in our field. Next slide. Again, at 60% seed color change, you're going to see these black specks. You might see some shredding and really heavy infection. My experience in Saskatchewan so far, in Manitoba, that's a little more common. In Saskatchewan, where we haven't seen quite the same infection pressure, I think it's rare to see that. I think you almost have to come back post-harvest and look at the stubble to see that really good shredding, but you can still find the microsclerotia early, and that gives you an indication the disease is there, it is causing some level of yield loss. Next slide. Yeah, delayed harvest is easier. So if you're unsure about verticillium, I would send samples to the lab. It's easy. While you're doing your blackleg, the same samples that you can quantify your blackleg and your verticillium in one test. But come back post-harvest if you really want to figure out if you do have verticillium in your field and you want to identify it yourself. It's much easier that way. Next slide. Just so we know about verticillium, it's a soil-borne disease. So it's living in your soil. It infects the roots underneath. But the material, the microsclerotia we've been talking about, those are in the above ground material. So they're going out the back of the combine. So while clubroot is patch management can be helpful, or it stays quite often in patches, verticillium will quite rapidly be across your field. So just be aware that you won't see probably distinguished patches, maybe in the first year or two, but it will likely be pretty readily across your entire field. Next slide. I just picked the Saskatchewan ones here because it kind of shows the evolution. In Manitoba, it is widespread. It's been there, and it can cause some pretty massive yield loss. On your left is 2023, the Saskatchewan survey, and 2025. You see slow, kind of steady growth in Saskatchewan of verticillium coming from the Manitoba side of the border. And in the 2025 survey, it's about a third of the actual samples came back positive for verticillium. Now, a lot of these ones, we haven't seen the massive yield loss that we've seen in Manitoba, though there were a few fields that were pretty significant in 2025. I think it's still a bit of an open question on whether we're just 5 or 6 years behind Manitoba. It's coming, it will be more problematic for us, or whether the conditions are a little bit different. Because it's a soil disease, soil conditions, it might be that we have presence of it, but it's not as much of a yield robber as Manitoba. But I guess the jury's still out. What we do know is it continues to kind of spread throughout the province. Next slide. So management of verticillium. We have this disease. We can just click through so we get all of the management list up there. With blackleg, we went through a lot of things. We have 4 different big management schemes we can kind of work through. We have a yield loss model to tell you, identifying it. This is how much yield you're losing in your field. This is how to, we have all of these options. With verticillium, we are not there. Newer disease to us. We have no fungicides or treatments available. Crop rotation can be somewhat helpful. Again, crop rotation is generally helpful. It's definitely no silver bullet, though. Reducing soil movement helps a little bit, but again, the spores are in the above ground material, so they are spreading through your combine. Genetic resistance will be our best option. Every company for the last couple of years has been screening their material, and we're seeing some differences. Now, the key thing is that some of those differences, in one year, a variety looked really good. The next year, there was a lot more muted the differences. Genetic resistance is our best option. There's differences there. We don't have any home run like blackleg 20 years ago where you throw in this one gene, and you have no verticillium. That just doesn't, that might be the case one day, and companies are working hard to find those genes, find those varieties, but breeding programs take a long time, and we're still early days of the genetic resistance. So for verticillium right now, we're kind of in a understand if you have it in your field, understand if you do think you're losing yield, monitor it. But we know there's this interaction between blackleg and verticillium, that 1 + 1 is equally more than 2. So this is an extra reason to be really on top of our blackleg control, really managing the blackleg. Maybe that takes it from a bad verticillium infection to only presence or a moderate infection, and we don't use the yield loss. So even if you've been doing the same thing, you're pretty happy with your blackleg program, as verticillium becomes more problematic, adding in more tools or giving yourself more options and monitoring more consistently to make sure we're controlling our blackleg just gives us more options until we have some verticillium specific management practices. If you're looking in your Saskatchewan, because I work for Sask Oilseeds, if you're in Saskatchewan and you want to do disease testing, we have a free disease testing program we run every fall. So if you're a Saskatchewan grower, you can get one free test per farm, and we'll test for blackleg and verticillium for you. Just send it to Discovery Seed Lab. So call our office next fall if you're interested in getting a free test. I think it's a great, even if you pay for it, it's not that expensive of a test, but it's a great insight into what's happening in your specific fields. And again, the major gene resistance, genetic resistance, that is the backbone of our management program. And then we're going to add in these other ones, these other things, the fungicide, the seed treatment, maybe lengthening out our crop rotation. Those are the ones we're going to add in just to make it a more robust system. And hopefully that gives us a little bit of a buffer against verticillium. Certainly it's not going to be controlling verticillium, but just limiting the downside until we have more verticillium specific controls. That's all I had for you today.
Thank you, Ian. That's great. That was a lot of really good information. We definitely appreciate it. I do see some questions in the Q&A, but maybe we'll save them for the end of the presentation in case more come in, if you're able to stick around till the end. And just a reminder for everyone, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll try to answer all of them that we can. So thank you again, Ian. I always really enjoy hearing you speak. You're a tough act to follow, and I love learning more about the connection between verticillium and blackleg. So that was really great. And with that, we'll switch over a little bit to talking about Maxentis in particular. My name is Marissa Robitaille-Balog. I am a technical sales agronomist with Adama in southern Alberta, and I do apologize. I've been having some computer issues today, so I'm going to be off video so that I can stay on the Zoom. And with that, maybe we'll advance to the next slide, please. So, complementing Ian's talk, Maxentis is now registered for blackleg control. Maxentis is a new product for Adama that's been in the marketplace for just a few years, and as of last year, we now have a registered rate for blackleg control, which I'm going to talk about a little bit further in the next few slides. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so talking a little bit more about Maxentis in depth. So Maxentis is a first of its kind multi-mode of action fungicide. It's a combination of azoxystrobin and prothioconazole. This product was screened and tested pretty extensively before it was brought to market, and the actives in that unique combination are what make it such a powerful tool on farm. So Maxentis is an EC formulation, and being an EC formulation, it does offer easier handability. This formulation also has the Azorbital technology, which is unique to Adama, and that is important for a fungicide type product because it allows the product to move into the plant quicker, which is really important when you're working with an active like prothioconazole, for example, which is quite sensitive to photodegradation. So you don't want it sitting on that leaf for too long of a time period. So that's why it's really important that we're able to have such a unique formulation. So these two powerful active ingredients combined for the first time help provide that protective and curative action in a wide range of diseases. As you can see here, we have sclerotinia, peas, lentils, soybeans have their own unique rate. But for the sake of this presentation, we're just going to focus on this blackleg rate. Water volume, water volume, as you can see in the corner, 10 gallons an acre ground minimum, 5 gallons an acre aerial minimum. And it's really important, I think, to be talking about water volume, especially when we're talking about a fungicide that's being applied at such an early stage. So we're wanting to apply our Maxentis at the 2 to 6 leaf stage or the 2 to 4 leaf stage, as Ian touched on, because it's so important to be able to get into that plant before that disease sets in as well. So really focusing on water volume to get really solid coverage is really going to be important for this product. And then for rain fastness, like many other fungicides, just avoid applying it when rain is in the forecast, of course. So with that, I'll move over to the next slide, please, and show a little bit of trial data that we had that I'm excited to share. So this RA was conducted at the Blackleg rate, the 253 milliliters an acre near Melfort, Saskatchewan in 2024, and this was prior to full registration. So you can see that we compared Maxentis to bumper to an untreated check. So the Maxentis is on the left-hand side, and it really shows in that map that the plant stayed greener, healthier for longer, as well as being protected from blackleg disease, which did result in a 6 bushel yield bump over the untreated check. And I think something really important to note, if we look a little bit closer in this photo, something really interesting is this little green strip that you can see on the right-hand side of the bumper trial to the left of the photo is actually a grower that had some leftover Maxentis in his tank. So that smaller greener strip in the that smaller greener strip in the bumper trial is actually Maxentis, which is really showcasing really nice and visual the effectiveness of this fungicide versus even another treatment option in the marketplace due to that formulation and that active ingredient advantage, and especially over an untreated check. Next slide, please. This was conducted in 2025 in St. Walburg, Saskatchewan, again at the 253 milliliter blackleg rate. As Ian's presentation discussed, it doesn't take a lot of blackleg to be robbing us of yield quite quickly. And on the other side of the coin, it doesn't take a lot of bushels increase to pay for the application of a fungicide in situations like this. So I know that I'm going to turn these slides over to Rianne in the next few minutes, and she's going to talk a little bit more about considering the applicability of using a fungicide at herbicide timing. But some of the benefits of this can be saving an extra pass through the field. It's not an extra pass, it's an extra tank mix, and that can help reduce costs. The fungicide bushel helps increase that ROI. As the plants break down post-harvest, that means that you have less disease potentially going back into your field from infected canola stubble, and that means putting future canola crops less at risk in rotation as well. So it is a really important part of a preventative strategy, and I think Ian did a really good job talking about that as well in his graphs before that showed we had a lot of blackleg last year, something as a watch out for 2026. This can help maintain those levels of infection in the fields that keep cycling through year over year. Next slide, please. And then the last slide that I wanted to share with you before I turn it over is just some results across the prairie. So I focused my first two on Saskatchewan, but you can see Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, all showed a yield advantage over an untreated check, and in some cases over a competitor when there was a competitor trial available as well. So it does seem to pay to spray. We're very excited to have a unique product in the marketplace that can help be a solution to such a critical canola problem. So with that, I will turn it over to Rianne, and then we will address questions at the end of the webinar and really encourage you to use the Q&A. Thank you.
Nice. So, yeah, when we're talking about blackleg fungicide application, this is the similar chart as to what Ian had showed earlier today, but we're really focusing on that critical infection window. So after the spores are released and into that primary infection, just to make sure that we get complete coverage throughout the growing cycle and that we slow down any chance of secondary infection, fungal growth through the stem, and those later season results where you see the cankering and the lodging, and hopefully reduce residue going further. So with Maxentis, we are going to go in at a 33 acre a jug rate, or 467 acres per drum. Next slide, please. So our recommendation with Maxentis is to go in early. Any of the research done by Canola Council or Agriculture Canada is showing that blackleg infection at or just after the cotyledon stage is where we're most likely to see any yield loss. So our recommendation is to go in with that tank mix at the cotyledon to 4-leaf stage. So depending when you're spraying, make sure that you're going in early. Next slide. So Mexentis, powered by the Azorbital, we do have a maximum application of one application per year. With Blackleg, our early application required is from 2 to 6 leaf. But it's not a one-trick pony, this product. We do also have rates that will cover sclerotinia in our canola, as well as our white molds in lentils and soybeans and peas. And we do have suppression on Mycosphaerella blight, as well as control on anthracnose and ascochytus. So um, if there is a chance that we all know when we're spraying, sometimes a product gets missed, you do have further applications for this product. And it has really good effective suppression or control of these other pathogens. Next slide, please. So why would we choose Mexentis? We are the first dual mode of action for resistance management with our group 3 prothioconazole and group 11 azoxystrobin. We do have the asorbitol formulation technology, which is unique to Adama, and we have the longest lasting protection currently on the market. We have both translaminar and systemic movement that provides a protective and curative action. And we need to remember that this is an extra mix. It is not an extra pass. So especially with our blackleg, for our growers that can be a little more sensitive to applications, we are able to mix this in with their regular herbicides, either glufosinate-based or glyphosate-based. And we do see an average of 6 bushel an acre improvement over untreated checks. So it definitely makes sense to consider this application, especially in areas where blackleg has become more prevalent. Next slide, please. Within Adama, we do a fair bit of testing on all our formulations to ensure compatibility within the tank mix, as well as making sure that the actives will work together on the field. So most of our research is done at the Prairie Agricultural Machinery Institute, where we have mixed with both our regular graminicides as well as our glyphosinates and some insecticides to ensure that Mexentis is going to be safe with our Adama herbicides and insecticides. So, and with that, we will move to our Q&A.
So we do have some great questions popping up in the Q&A. First question, I think this is directed for Ian. Put you back in the hot seat. How many stem cuts are needed to send away to Discovery Seed Labs?
Anywhere from about a dozen to 20-ish. If in doubt, I would aim towards the higher number just to be safe, but it's not that many. 20, the harder part is just making sure you have a good distribution throughout the field.
Okay, and kind of on a similar note, what lab is it in Alberta where you would send your samples off to? You shared Saskatchewan's, but could you share Alberta's as well? Or Manitoba?
2020 Seed Labs is the Alberta one.
Awesome, thank you. Um, mm, I'll take on this one. Can you comment on blackleg levels in southern Alberta? Yeah, so previous to my role at Adama, I actually worked for the Canola Council as well, alongside Ian. And part of my role was doing provincial disease surveying in Alberta and Saskatchewan. As well as being called out to fields quite frequently. So I got to see firsthand a lot of different fields in southern Alberta around that blackleg timing. And I think that there is a surprising amount of blackleg in southern Alberta, despite the dry conditions that we often face. I think that sometimes we are caught up in the fact that we're not receiving a lot of moisture, so it's hard to think of the disease triangle when we're missing that key environmental component. But blackleg is certainly in southern Alberta. Doing stem cuts, I found a surprising amount in a lot of areas that you maybe wouldn't expect to see it if you were just driving by the field. So I do think that it's a lot more present than we sometimes consider, and I think it's really important to be having that conversation. Going back to Ian's talk, we talked a lot about varieties, about scouting, and about the importance. So I think just having those conversations early on in September, October, when you're buying your canola seed, sending samples away to get tested, using a fungicide option, doing stem cuts, and just really getting to understand your field, I think it could be quite eye-opening to see what might actually be out there before you're even really seeing those above ground symptoms or yield loss. But that's a great opportunity to be preventative and to take action before it becomes a significant yield robber in your field, or maybe addressing it as something that might actually be more of a yield robber than you had considered previously. Okay. Another question. In the Blackleg trials, do you think any of the results could be due to less verticillium? Did you check side-by-side stubble for Blackleg and verticillium?
I'm gonna make the assumption for Alberta anyways. Our trials in Alberta were done in northern Alberta, where um, we generally as a team or as an industry aren't really looking for verticillium just yet. So I would say for at least the Alberta trials, we're not looking for verticillium. Um, there could be potential that there would be less verticillium for the plots over in Manitoba, but really we were looking for the blackleg symptomology and to see if that made a difference. So.
The one thing I would add, I had a question that came directly to me, and it was looking at can you comment on the expectation of like the verticillium efficacy from this blackleg? We talked about the efficacy on blackleg. Is the fungicide itself doing something directly on verticillium? And I wasn't involved with these trials, but in general, we have no fungicide efficacy on verticillium. And the reason for that is verticillium is a soil-borne disease. The infection is happening below ground. And so with the symptoms you see above ground, it's already in the plant. Blackleg's a foliar disease. You're seeing that infection happen above ground, and that's where a fungicide can work really well. So when we're talking about when I was talking about doing everything you can to control blackleg to help verticillium, you're helping to make a healthier plant that maybe is less susceptible to verticillium. But the fungicide itself is not, or your control things you're doing for blackleg aren't going to directly limit the verticillium. You're just looking for a healthier plant because there is an interaction and the plant's ability to compensate a little bit for some of these diseases is kind of lacking if it's already compromised by having a early season blackleg infection.
Also got a question that says, showed up to the webinar late, so we might have already discussed this. Could we elaborate on the isorbitol technology? What positive agronomic attributes does it offer concerning its application? So isorbitol is Adama's proprietary formulation technology, and for the most part, it helps with improved uptake and controlled migration within the plants. So when we pair it with key active ingredients, it helps deliver enhanced penetration efficacy, and then it helps our formulations provide excellent disease control, and it can be extended over compared to some of the other products on the market with the same actives. We regularly see improved control with this technology. Okay, so with that, move on from our Q&A. So our next webinar in this series is going to be on February the 26th, and it's going to be called Layering for Success, Building a Strong Pre-Seed Weed Program, and it will be hosted with some of our other Adama TSAs. So make sure to join us for that. And today we do have CCA credits available. So if you'd like to scan the QR code, we'll go from there. Thank you all for joining today.
Big thank you again, Ian, for taking the time to join us on our webinar today. We really appreciate it. It was nice to see you again.